The moment I stepped onto the ship, I felt something was wrong. It wasn't the size or the design. The ship looked like any luxury liner I'd seen in travel ads, but the air around it seemed heavier, like the ocean itself was holding its breath. The strangest part was I couldn't find this cruise anywhere online. No listing, no company name, not even a single review. Yet somehow I had a ticket in my hand, as if it had been waiting for me. The passengers looked normal at first, glanced dressed for vacation, carrying bags, smiling faintly. But when I tried to meet their eyes, most looked away too quickly, as if contact wasn't allowed. Their smiles seemed rehearsed, like actors stuck in the same role for too long. I told myself I was imagining it, but when the engines roared to life and the ship pulled from the dock, my chest tightened. The coastline shrank far too fast, swallowed by fog that seemed to rise from nowhere. I remember gripping the railing, realizing something I couldn't explain. Once this ship left port, there would be no turning back. Whatever I had boarded, it wasn't a vacation. It was a trap. I only boarded because of a deal that felt too good to be real. A late-night scroll through discount travel sites turned up an ad I couldn't trace back to any company. No logo, no phone number, just a flashing banner that read, "One night only, exclusive voyage, tickets remaining." 1. I should have closed the page, but something about it tugged at me, like the ocean itself was calling my name. Before I knew it, I'd entered my card details. Hours later, a paper ticket arrived at my apartment. No return address, no barcode, just my name printed in perfect black ink. When I reached the dock, the ship towered above me, gleaming white under the dim harbor lights. From a distance, it looked new, elegant even. But up close, the details frayed. Crew uniforms hung loose and faded, their once crisp navy now washed into gray. The name across the bow had clearly been painted over, leaving behind faint scars of letters I couldn't read. Still, no one around me seemed bothered. The passengers shuffled forward quietly, exchanging polite greetings that felt mechanical, like they'd rehearsed the same lines for years. I tried speaking to a woman beside me, but her smile froze. Her words clipped and hollow. Then the engines rumbled. I glanced back at the shore, only to see it vanishing far too quickly, swallowed by an unnatural fog. The land dissolved as though the sea itself had erased it, leaving nothing but endless water stretching in every direction. I spent the first hours wandering the ship, trying to shake off the unease that clung to me. At first, the corridors seemed straightforward, carpeted hallways lined with polished brass fixtures and cabin doors. But the longer I walked, the more disoriented I became. No matter which turn I took, I somehow ended up in the same stretch of hallway, facing the same crooked painting of a lighthouse. I laughed nervously at first, convincing myself I was tired, but the laughter died when I tried marking a door with my fingernail and later found the mark on every door I touched. That night I followed the other passengers to the dining hall. Long tables stretched beneath chandeliers, a feast laid out in perfect symmetry. The food looked fresh, steaming, but when I sat down, the silence unsettled me more than hunger could. Dozens of people sat together, yet the only sound was the scrape of utensils against plates. No chatter, no laughter, just mechanical eating, like a ritual they'd performed countless times. My stomach nodded, but I forced down a bite, desperate not to stand out. It was then I noticed one man staring at me across the table. He leaned closer, his voice a harsh whisper against the unnatural quiet. "Don't stay on deck after midnight," he warned, his eyes darting toward the crew. Before I could ask what he meant, he lowered his gaze and resumed eating, his fork clinking in rhythm with the others. Later, unable to sleep, I stood alone on the deck. Midnight crept in, the sky black as ink, the ocean blending seamlessly with the horizon. That's when I heard it, singing. Not beautiful, but distorted, like voices rising from beneath the water, warped by distance and despair. The melody wrapped around me, pulling me closer to the railing. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A figure glided across the far side of the deck, tall and impossibly thin, its steps too smooth to be human. It wasn't wearing a crew uniform. It wasn't dressed at all, just a shadow etched against the fog. I froze, heart pounding as the singing swelled, echoing from the deep. The next morning I set out determined to find answers. A ship this size had to have a control room, a captain, someone who could explain what was happening. I followed signs. That should have led to the bridge, but every stairwell seemed to twist back on itself. Finally, I reached a heavy steel door marked Authorized Personnel Only. I knocked, then pounded, but no one answered. When I turned, 2 crew members stood watching me from down the hall. Their faces were expressionless, their eyes dull, and when I called out, they simply walked away without a word. Frustrated, I began exploring areas of the ship that seemed less maintained. Past a roped-off stairwell, I found a corridor where the air smelled damp and metallic. Doors were chained, shut, and paint peeled from the walls. One door had been left slightly ajar, and curiosity overpowered fear. Inside, the room was stacked with old trunks and moldy suitcases. Dust coated everything, and a faint stench of salt and mildew lingered. I opened one trunk and froze. Inside were clothes from another era, worn dresses, a child's sailor cap, brittle leather shoes. Scattered among them were photographs, passengers smiling on deck, clinking glasses in the dining hall, dancing under chandeliers. But the edges of the photos were yellowed, the dates on the backs decades old. Some faces were crossed out entirely with thick black ink. A chill ran down my spine as I dug deeper, finding pile after pile of belongings left behind. Had no one ever disembarked this ship? Was it collecting people, decade after decade? Then, at the bottom of a cracked leather suitcase, I found a photograph that made my blood turn cold. It was me, standing at the very railing I'd leaned on the night before, my face pale in the moonlight. Scribbled on the back was a date from 10 years earlier. I dropped it, my hands trembling. Somehow I had been here before. I found the man who had whispered to me in the dining hall, sitting alone on the observation deck, staring out into the endless black water. His face was gaunt, his hands shaking as if he hadn't slept in years. When I sat beside him, he didn't look at me, he just spoke, his voice low and raw. This ship, it isn't real. It isn't alive either. It's caught between places. Between time. We sail, and none of us ever reach land. Sooner or later, the ship makes you part of it. I wanted to deny him, but the memory of that photograph in the luggage room burned in my mind. My throat tightened. Then how do we get off? I asked. He finally turned to me, his eyes hollow. No one does. Desperation clawed at me. That night, while the others slept, I climbed the railing and hurled myself overboard. I braced for the shock of icy seawater, but there was no splash, no waves. I fell into silence, into an abyss of endless darkness that swallowed everything. The void stretched in every direction, thick and suffocating, and before I could scream, the ship was beneath me again. I was back on the deck, gasping, as if I'd never left. From that moment, the crew's behavior changed. They no longer ignored me, they followed me. Always a step behind, their presence pressing closer, their blank faces watching with a patience more terrifying than hostility. They never spoke, but I felt them hurting me, steering me toward something inevitable. Then came the voices. At first faint, drifting through the static of the intercoms, but soon louder, clear, undeniable. My name, spoken slowly, over and over, echoing through every corridor, every stairwell, until it seemed the ship itself was calling me. The friendly passenger was gone. The others kept eating, kept smiling, as if nothing had changed. But I knew the truth. The ship wanted me. On my final night, the ship summoned me. I don't know how else to describe it. The intercom crackled with static, then my name, drawn out like a command, pulling me toward the grand hall. I tried to resist, but my legs carried me forward as if the ship itself had taken control. When I entered, every passenger was waiting. Rows upon rows of them sat at long tables, faces turned in unison, their smiles stretched too wide, too fixed. The chandeliers blazed overhead, casting the room in golden light that only made their eyes look emptier. At the far end of the hall, an empty chair waited. My chair. I backed away, heart pounding, but the crew closed in silently, their faded uniforms brushing against me as they guided me forward. The passengers began to clap, slow and hollow, the sound echoing through the chamber like a funeral march. I opened my mouth to scream, but the moment I did, the lights flickered, and the roar of the ocean surged, drowning my voice completely. So, if you ever see a cruise ship that isn't on any map, don't board. I wish I hadn't. I don't know how long I've been out here. Days? Weeks? Time doesn't feel real anymore when the horizon never changes. I boarded this ship expecting a week of sun, cocktails, and music, but what I got was something I can't explain. Something I can't escape. The strangest part is the ship never stops, it just keeps sailing, cutting through endless black water with no destination in sight. I tried asking the crew where we were headed, but they only smile and say, "Soon." Soon never comes. At first I told myself it was just a strange cruise, maybe a new company with its own way of doing things, but every night when I hear the halls echoing with footsteps that don't belong to anyone I've seen, I realize this isn't a vacation. It's a trap. The walls seem to close in tighter with each passing day, corridors repeating themselves, like a maze designed to wear me down. And the passengers, God, the passengers, there's something wrong with them. They eat, they smile, but their eyes are empty, like they've already accepted something I haven't. I know now that this voyage isn't about reaching paradise. It's about never returning. It all started so simply, the kind of decision you make without thinking twice. I was scrolling late at night, half bored, when an ad popped up on my screen. Luxury cruise, 1 week, 90% off, limited time. The deal was so ridiculous I laughed at first, but curiosity pulled me in. No company name, no reviews, no option to call. Just a timer counting down and a single glowing button that said, "Book now." I should have closed the page, but something about it felt irresistible, like the ocean itself was reaching through the screen, urging me forward. Within minutes, I'd entered my details. Hours later, a sleek envelope slid under my apartment door. No return address, just a golden ticket, with my name printed across it. When I arrived at the dock, the ship was breathtaking from afar, rising out of the mist like a floating palace. But as I got closer, the illusion cracked. The flags hanging from the rails were frayed and sun-bleached. Paint peeled from the sides in strips, revealing rust beneath the polish. The name of the vessel had been clumsily painted over, faint letters, bleeding through like scars. The crew greeted us with smiles that never touched their eyes. Their uniforms were pressed but oddly faded, as if they'd been washed too many times. I tried to strike up small talk with another passenger in line, but she only gave me a stiff smile and turned away without a word. The few who did speak sounded rehearsed, their words clipped and hollow like they were reading from a script they couldn't deviate from. The moment I stepped onto the deck, the ship lurched forward, engines rumbling like a beast eager to run. I rushed to the railing to watch the shoreline fade, but it vanished faster than it should have, swallowed by thick fog that seemed to rise out of nowhere. Within minutes, the land was gone, erased completely as if it had never existed at all. I stood frozen, the salt air stinging my face as a terrible realization took hold. This voyage had already trapped me, and there would be no turning back. The ship was larger inside than it had looked from the dock, but something about the layout gnawed at me. Corridors stretched long and narrow. Yet when I turned corners, I found myself looping back to the same stairwell, or passing the same crooked painting of a stormy sea. At first, I thought I was simply disoriented, but after the third time circling, back to my cabin without meaning to, I felt the cold press of unease. The air in the halls carried a faint smell of mildew and salt, heavy as if the ship had been sealed shut for years. By evening, I followed the flow of passengers to the dining hall. It was vast and chandelier lit, but instead of the chatter and laughter I expected, there was only silence. Dozens of guests sat rigid at long tables, their faces slack, their eyes fixed downward. The only sound was the synchronized scrape of forks and knives, metal grinding against porcelain in perfect unison. The rhythm was steady, almost ritualistic, as if everyone were bound to the same invisible conductor. I sat down, forcing myself to eat, though the food tasted bland, flavorless, as though it had been drained of life. That was when a man across from me finally spoke. His suit was crisp but outdated, his smile too wide to be comforting. "First time aboard?" he asked lightly, his tone warm but carrying a strange edge. Before I could answer, he leaned closer, his voice dropping into a whisper. A word of advice. Don't walk the deck after midnight. His eyes lingered on me a moment longer. Then he stood and left without finishing his meal. The warning gnawed at me all night. By the time the clock struck 12, curiosity outweighed caution. I slipped from my cabin and crept toward the deck, the halls darker and colder than before. Outside, the air was unnaturally still, the sea black and endless. Then I heard them, faint voices rising from the water below, not carried by the wind but bubbling up from beneath the waves. They were calling, layered and inhuman, their words indistinguishable yet dripping with intent. I gripped the railing, heart pounding, when movement caught my eye. At the far end of the deck stood a figure, tall and distorted, its limbs too long, its head tilted unnaturally. It didn't move toward me, but I felt its gaze lock onto mine. The voices surged louder, wrapping around me like the tide, and I realized the warning hadn't been for fear. It had been for survival. By morning, my unease had hardened into determination. Whatever haunted this ship, I needed answers. I followed. The polished brass signs that pointed toward the bridge convinced the captain could explain. But when I reached the heavy doors marked control room, they wouldn't budge. The handles were ice cold, unyielding, as if welded shut. I knocked, then pounded, but no reply came. A passing steward glanced at me without slowing, his face expressionless, eyes glazed as though he hadn't really seen me at all. When I pressed him, he merely repeated, "Passengers are not permitted beyond this point." His voice, flat, mechanical. Frustration pushed me deeper into the ship. I took stairwells that smelled faintly of rust, ducked into unmarked corridors, and soon found myself in a place no passenger was meant to see. The wallpaper peeled, the carpeting was damp, and the air grew thick, with a sour metallic tang. Behind a half-open door, I discovered a storage area piled with abandoned luggage. Suitcases gaped open, spilling clothes that had decayed into brittle rags. Dresses from the 1940s, suits yellowed with age, shoes rotted at the seams. The air was heavy with dust and something older, almost funereal. Among the heaps were photographs. They lay scattered across the floor, curling at the edges, their black and white faces staring up blankly. Families smiling on deck, couples arm in arm, children clutching toys. Each one dated carefully on the back, spanning decades. 1952, 1976, 1993. Names I didn't know, faces frozen in time. And yet, none of these people had been at dinner. None of them were anywhere on the ship. A sickening thought spread through me. This vessel had been circling the seas for generations, drawing in passengers who never returned. They boarded, they smiled, they vanished. The silence in the dining hall, the empty eyes of the crew, it all fit together. Then I saw it, tucked beneath a cracked leather trunk, a photograph half buried in dust. I pulled it free, already dreading what I would find. My throat closed as I stared down at my own face. I was standing on the deck, smiling faintly at the camera, dressed in the very clothes I wore now. On the back, in faded ink, was a date, August 23, 1985. The photograph slipped from my fingers. I wasn't just a passenger. I had been here before. The friendly passenger found me again, his hollow smile stretched wider than before. We sat on a bench near the railing, though the horizon looked wrong, flat, unending, without color. He spoke in fragments as if memory itself was decaying. This ship, it doesn't belong anywhere anymore. Between here and elsewhere. It sails forever. I asked how long he'd been aboard. His eyes flicked nervously, then down at his hands. where his skin looked paper thin. Everyone asks that, at first, but eventually, you stop counting. Panic throbbed in my chest. I didn't wait to hear more. Instead, I ran, down the deck, past the indifferent crew polishing brass that no longer shone. Without thinking, I vaulted the railing. The wind whipped at me for a split second, then I was falling, but not into water. Below stretched a chasm of nothing. No waves, no sea, just endless black swallowing everything. And then, impact, cold, sharp. My lungs seized as I gasped, only to find myself sprawled back on the ship's deck, soaked but not with seawater. The friendly passenger stood over me, pity in his voice. No one leaves. The ship always keeps what it takes. From that night on, the atmosphere shifted. The crew no longer simply ignored me. They maneuvered subtly, closing corridors, standing in doorways, always directing me forward. The other passengers watched with faint smiles, their eyes following me like shadows. Worse were the whispers. At first faint and distant, then unmistakable. My own name, hissing from the intercom, seeping through the static. "We're waiting for you." Everywhere I turned, my identity was already written into the ship's script. I was no longer a guest. I was being claimed. The final night came without warning. My cabin door clicked open by itself, the corridor outside glowing faintly gold. A voice on the intercom, smoother now, called my name clearly. "Join us." I followed, powerless, to the grand hall I had once wandered past. Tonight it was alive. Candles burning in endless rows, chandeliers swaying though there was no wind. Every passenger was gathered, faces tilted toward me, smiling with identical stillness. The crew stood behind them like sentinels. A table stretched across the room, laden with food that looked too vivid, too unreal, its colors bleeding under the flickering light. At the head of the hall, a chair waited. My chair. Only then did I understand. This wasn't hospitality. It was initiation. The celebration was a ritual, binding me as the ship's newest permanent soul. The smiles widened as I stepped forward. My throat tightened, a scream rising, but the roar of the unseen ocean surged louder, drowning my voice. The lights shuddered, the hall bent and warped, and then nothing. So if you ever find yourself tempted by a cruise you can't trace back, one no travel agent remembers selling, don't go. You might never leave. I woke to a silence so complete it felt unnatural, like the air itself had been drained of life. No muffled footsteps in the corridor, no distant chatter of passengers, not even the usual crackle of the intercom announcing breakfast. Just silence, thick and heavy, pressing against my chest. For a moment I thought I had overslept, that maybe everyone else had moved on with their day, but the stillness told me otherwise. I pushed myself out of bed, my bare feet brushing against the cool floor, and reached for the door handle. When it swung open, the hallway greeted me with a flickering light that hummed and buzzed like it was struggling to stay alive. The once bustling corridor stretched out in both directions, completely deserted. Not a soul in sight. Suitcases lay abandoned against the walls, some tipped over, their contents spilling out like secrets half buried. A child's stuffed animal sat upright on the floor, its glassy eyes staring at me as though waiting to be claimed. My throat tightened. Where was everyone? Every ship I'd ever been on pulsed with movement, laughter, footsteps. But here, now, I felt only absence. And with that absence came a question that rooted itself deep in my mind. What happened to them? When I finally gathered the courage to leave my cabin, I expected to find answers. Instead, I stepped into a ghost ship. The first place I wandered was one of the restaurants, and what I saw nearly knocked the breath out of me. Plates of food sat abandoned on the tables, steam still rising faintly, as if the meals had been left only minutes ago. Glasses of wine were half empty, water beads sliding down their sides, fresh and cold. But the chairs, some were pushed back violently, others tipped on their sides, like the diners had left in a sudden rush. I kept moving, my shoes clicking against the floor, the sound unnervingly sharp in the silence. The children's play area was next, and there I froze. Toys were scattered across the floor. Stuffed animals slumped against walls. Tiny shoes lying in pairs. Crayons snapped mid-coloring. But no laughter, no crying, no children. The absence was deafening. In the casino, the slot machines glowed, with frozen reels, their cheerful lights flickering like broken smiles. Chips and cards lay abandoned on tables, some hands left face up as though their owners had vanished mid-game. I called out then, just a desperate, trembling, "Hello?" But the only answer was my own voice ricocheting back through the hollow halls. As I walked, I noticed more personal items scattered everywhere. Jackets draped over chairs, jewelry glinting under the dim lights, purses hanging open as if someone had just set them down to grab a drink. Everything felt lived in, alive, yet utterly empty. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a normal evacuation, no fire drill, no storm. It was as if every single person had been plucked away in the middle of their lives, leaving the ship itself, untouched. My chest tightened as unease settled deeper. Then, in the corner of the dining hall, I spotted it. A crumpled napkin wedged between overturned glasses. The ink had bled slightly, the letters hurried, uneven. "Don't let them see you," the word swam in my mind, carving fear into my bones. I didn't know who they were, but suddenly the silence felt heavier, like something unseen was already watching me. When night came, the ship transformed. The silence that had weighed on me all day seemed to shift into something worse, something alive. From somewhere deep within the vessel, I began to hear sounds, at first faint and distant. The click of heels against marble flooring, the shuffle of hurried footsteps, the delicate clinking of glasses raised in a toast. And then, laughter. Soft, melodic, but strangely hollow. I followed the echoes, my pulse racing. Every corner I turned, every doorway I pushed open, I expected to find people waiting. But each time I was met with nothing. Empty lounges, abandoned bars, ballrooms stripped of their dancers. The laughter faded as soon as I entered. Like the ship itself was mocking me with ghosts I could never reach. My head spun. Were there survivors hiding from me? Or worse, was I losing my grip, the solitude already unraveling my mind? In desperation, I forced my way into the crew's control room. To my shock, every system was still alive. The monitors glowing. Navigation, steady, course locked toward the endless sea. The engines hummed beneath my feet, dutifully pushing us further into nowhere. I scanned the logs, searching for an explanation. Most of it was routine, checklists, head counts, navigational data. And then it stopped. The final entry burned into my mind. All passengers accounted for. Midnight celebration begins. My throat tightened. Celebration? At midnight. The words seemed innocent, almost cheerful, but something about them dripped with menace. The crew had written no more after that. No updates, no reports, no closure. Just that haunting line, as if the ship itself had swallowed the rest. Panic welled up inside me. A celebration no one returned from. An event so final, it left behind meals, toys, jewelry, lives paused mid-breath. What had they celebrated? And why wasn't I part of it? The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. I made a decision that night. If the last log spoke of a midnight celebration, then I would not sleep. I would watch. Whatever haunted this ship, I would face it during the hours most feared. The hours they called the witching time. The vessel lay wrapped in darkness, the sea outside black as ink. I walked the corridors with the dim glow of emergency lights, guiding me, and soon I found myself drawn to the great windows lining the promenade deck. That was when I saw them. Reflections. Not mine. Others. Shadows of men and women, their faces blurred, their forms swaying as if to music only they could hear. They moved just beyond the glass as though the ocean itself carried their shapes. But when I turned, heart hammering, there was nothing. Just the hollow corridor and my own shallow breathing. I pressed on, uneasy, until the ship led me back to its ballroom. The chandeliers still burned low, casting long golden streaks across polished floors. In the center, a circle of chairs had been arranged with deliberate precision, facing inward like witnesses to some ceremony. I approached cautiously. Every chair was empty, except one. Resting neatly on its seat was a folded cruise brochure. My hands trembled as I opened it. Across the glossy page, in elegant lettering, were the words, "Welcome to the Eternal Voyage." The phrase struck like a blade. This wasn't a holiday cruise, it was something else, a trap disguised as luxury, a journey with no return. Had every passenger stepped willingly into this so-called eternity? Or had they, like me, been lured here unsuspecting? The walls seemed to close in. My paranoia sharpened into terror. I could feel them. Eyes watching from corners, from ceilings, from places I could not name. Then came the whispers. Low, slithering, curling into my ears like smoke. My name. They were whispering my name. I spun around, searching for a speaker, for a person, for anything. But only the shadows answered, stretching and swaying with each flicker of light. And in that moment I understood. The ship wasn't abandoned. Not truly. Something was still here. And it wanted me. The silence had begun to gnaw at me, but then, without warning, the ship came alive. Music swelled through the corridors, a grand orchestra playing waltzes and jazz. I heard glasses clinking, heels tapping, and bursts of laughter rolling across the decks. For the first time since I boarded, it sounded like life. But when I opened my eyes, the sound died. The hallway stretched out, empty and still, not a single body in sight. My breath quickened. I closed my eyes again, and instantly the noise returned, louder this time, as though the entire ship was pulsing with unseen celebration. I staggered forward, forcing myself to walk with my eyes shut, guided by the phantom sounds. The laughter grew sharper, closer. The clinking of glasses seemed to lead me. Finally, I felt the heavy doors of the main hall beneath my palms. They swung open with a groan. Inside, the vast ballroom glowed with golden light. Rows upon rows of passengers stood waiting, their faces frozen in perfect smiles. Their skin was pale, waxy, almost translucent, and their eyes gleamed like glass marbles reflecting the chandeliers above. They all turned toward me. And then, as if rehearsed, they spoke in unison. "Welcome home." My body went cold. I tried to back away, but my legs felt locked in place. The sound of the orchestra swelled again, but this time I realized there was no band, just the echoing music of the ship itself vibrating through the walls. It struck me then. This wasn't an ordinary cruise. It never had been. This vessel was no passage across the ocean. It was a prison, an eternal stage where passengers were trapped, forever applauding the next arrival. I wasn't a guest. I was being initiated. The circle of smiling faces closed in around me, their voices weaving together into a chant I couldn't understand. The chandeliers flickered, the walls seemed to breathe, and the ship itself groaned like a living thing. Somewhere deep inside I knew the truth. The voyage never ends. And now, I was the newest passenger on the eternal cruise. The moment I tried to run, the smiling passengers surged forward in unison, their pale faces frozen in that eerie, glassy-eyed grin. Their steps were silent, but their presence swallowed the room. My heart pounded, my body screamed to escape, yet the doors slammed shut with a force that rattled the hall. I screamed, an animalistic, desperate sound. But the ocean's roar beyond the walls rose higher, drowning my voice in a thunderous, merciless chorus. The chandeliers flickered, shadows stretched across the floor, and the air itself seemed to pulse with music I couldn't place. The ship was no longer empty, it was alive, and I was its captive audience. The celebration began. Lights flashed, music swelled, and the faces around me blurred into a nightmarish carousel. I couldn't tell if I was still standing or already part of them. And as the world shifted into an endless night of forced festivity, a final truth seared into me like fire. This voyage was never meant to end. If you ever find yourself tempted by a cruise you can't trace back, don't go. Because once you board, you might never leave. Was I trapped in a supernatural loop? Or had I simply gone mad? Either way, the ship had claimed me. I still remember the captain's words, his voice low, almost swallowed by the ocean wind. Never wander the ship after midnight. Some doors aren't meant to be opened. At the time, I laughed it off, chalking it up to old sailor superstitions, the kind that seasoned crews whisper to unnerve first-timers. But now, alone in this cabin, the memory gnaws at me like a splinter under the skin. Outside, the ocean stretches endlessly, black and indifferent, its surface broken only by the pale shimmer of moonlight. No land, no lights, just me adrift in a floating labyrinth where silence feels heavier than the waves themselves. Inside, the walls press closer with every passing hour. The faint hum of the ship's engine thrums like a heartbeat beneath the floorboards, steady but suffocating. The air feels thick, as if the cabin itself resents me for staying awake. Yet beneath the weight of this isolation lies something more dangerous. My own curiosity. What lies beyond these corridors when the world sleeps? What truth hides behind the captain's warning? I should close my eyes, surrender to the night. But I already know I won't. And that choice will change everything. When I first stepped onto the ship, I expected music, chatter, and the cheerful chaos that usually comes with travel. Instead, silence pressed against me like a heavy fog. The grand chandelier above glittered brilliantly, but beneath it, the passengers shuffled about with odd stiffness, their faces blank masks that cracked into smiles a second too late, as if they were rehearsing emotions they had long forgotten. The staff moved with precision but avoided my eyes, their gazes always darting downward or over my shoulder, like they were terrified of acknowledgement. It wasn't until I reached the upper deck that I saw the captain. Tall, weathered, his uniform immaculate, his presence stopped me cold. He approached slowly, his expression carved in stone, and his voice was low, deliberate. No matter what you hear, don't open your cabin door at night. It was such a strange thing to say, more superstition than command, but the gravity in his tone froze me. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was just sailors' folklore, a ghost story for gullible tourists. That night I sat in my cabin surrounded by the trappings of luxury, velvet drapes, golden lamps, a bed soft as clouds. But the walls felt too close, the air too still. Around midnight the silence broke. Faint knocks began to echo down the corridor, irregular and deliberate, moving from door to door. My heart pounded as I sat frozen, listening. The knocks grew closer, each one sharper than the last, until they stopped outside my room. I held my breath, every muscle locked, the captain's warning looping in my mind. Don't open the door. My hand trembled as it hovered inches from the handle, curiosity clawing at me, but I forced myself to step back, retreating into the shadows, and so I waited in silence, pretending sleep, while something lingered just outside, knocking softly, patiently, as if it knew sooner or later I wouldn't be able to resist. By morning, the ship seemed transformed. Sunlight spilled through tall glass windows, painting the dining hall in warmth. Passengers laughed over champagne, clinked glasses, and danced to a cheerful string quartet. The strange stillness of last night felt like a fever dream, too absurd to believe. I forced myself to relax, sipping strong coffee while convincing myself the knocks had been nothing more than pipes groaning in the hull. But beneath the merriment, I noticed subtleties that unsettled me. Conversations halted the moment the subject of nighttime arose. Jokes and stories flowed easily until someone mentioned midnight, and then silence clamped down like a vice. When I asked one passenger about the ship's hallways after dark, she forced a smile too wide, her eyes darting nervously before she changed the subject. That night I tested it myself. The corridors, once bustling during the day, were abandoned, as if the entire ship had conspired to vanish once the clock struck 12. I tried to sleep, but the sounds returned. At first, a muffled cry, soft and distant, as though someone were calling for help from beneath the floorboards. Then came the dragging footsteps, slow, uneven, scraping against the wooden planks outside my door. My body tensed as something brushed against the door frame, a faint, deliberate rasp like fingertips tracing the wood. I pressed my ear to the door, breath caught in my throat. Silence. And then a whisper, too faint to catch. My hands shook as I fumbled for my recorder, placing it on the desk before crawling back beneath the covers, forcing my eyes shut. The next morning I played back the recording. At first, only static filled the room. Then, beneath the hiss, words emerged. A chorus, of voices low and layered, their cadence unnatural. "Join us, join us, join us." The whisper grew louder until it cracked, distorted by the machine as though dozens of mouths pressed against the microphone at once. I slammed the device off, my pulse hammering in my throat. The cabin was silent again, but the memory of those voices clung to me like frost. The captain's warning echoed in my mind with new weight. Yet even as dread coiled inside me, curiosity began to burn hotter. I wanted, needed, to know what waited in the halls after midnight. By the third day, my questions could no longer be swallowed. I cornered a young steward polishing glasses near the lounge, his crisp uniform gleaming under the light. "Tell me," I pressed, lowering my voice. "What happens here after midnight? Why does everyone vanish?" The boy froze, glass slipping, in his hand. His eyes darted to the corners of the room as if expecting someone to be listening. I don't know what you mean," he stammered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. When I pressed harder, demanding answers, he set the glass down with shaking fingers and backed away. "Don't ask. Don't ever ask." Then he fled down the hall, leaving me with more dread than before. That afternoon, I wandered further than usual and stumbled upon something I wasn't meant to see. Several decks were sealed off entirely, heavy chains bolted across doorways, locks gleaming like iron warnings. Signs marked storage or staff only, but the air around them felt wrong, thick with the weight of secrets. Crew members passed by, without so much as glancing at the chained doors, as though their existence had been erased from their minds. When I asked about them, I was met with polite, empty smiles, the kind that concealed fear. The captain found me that evening, his hand firm on my shoulder, his eyes cold with unspoken truths. "You won't survive curiosity," he said quietly, each word edged with finality. "Stay in your cabin. Trust me." Then he left me standing alone, the warmth of the ship's chandeliers suddenly sterile, like a mask hiding rot. That night the voices returned, but they had changed. No longer the faceless whispers of strangers. They now carried familiarity, my mother's voice, tender yet urgent, calling my name. The laughter of an old friend echoing just outside the door. My sister's cry, fragile and desperate, begging me to open. My heart twisted painfully, recognition pulling at me with ruthless claws. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the voices slipped through, weaving into my mind. Each word was sweet poison. "We need you, it's safe here, and open the door." My body trembled as I stood, my bare feet cold against the floorboards. I reached for the handle, my hand shaking violently. The whispers swelled into a chorus. Of love and need, and against all reason, my fingers tightened around the metal. The fourth night broke me. The whispers had grown louder, so human, so achingly familiar, that resisting felt impossible. My mother's voice, trembling with love, begged me to let her in. My best friend laughed softly like he always did when he wanted to ease my nerves. My father's stern tone commanded me to obey. My hand shook as it hovered over the handle, my heart pounding with betrayal against every warning. And then, as if something deep inside me finally cracked, I turned the knob. The door creaked open, and what I saw froze every muscle in my body. The corridor was no longer empty. It was lined with people, dozens of passengers standing perfectly, still. Their smiles were stretched too wide, their faces pale, waxy, as though carved from melted candle flesh. Their eyes glistened with a hollow shine, and in perfect unison, They tilted their heads toward me. "One of us," they whispered, voices layered like a chant. "One of us." I stumbled backward, but their movements were synchronized, every step slow, deliberate, closing in like a tide. I bolted, sprinting down the hall, my breath burning, but no matter how far I ran, the ship betrayed me. The hallways twisted, looping endlessly, leading me back to the same doors, the same pale faces waiting. Panic clawed at me as realization took hold. These weren't passengers. These weren't living beings at all. They were echoes, fragments, of those who had opened their doors before me, swallowed whole by whatever curse this vessel carried. And the ship itself. It wasn't just wood and steel. It breathed, it pulsed, it fed. Every whisper, every creak of the boards beneath my feet was alive, hungering for the same thing that had driven me to this point. Curiosity. I had given it exactly what it wanted. Ran until my lungs burned, but the hallways only folded back on themselves. The passengers were everywhere now, drifting closer, their smiles widening as their chant grew deafening. One of us. One of us. I shoved past them, clawing at walls, searching for a door, a window, anything. But the ship sealed itself against me. Lights flickered overhead, bursting with a sickly glow, and the sound of the ocean roared through the walls like a monster's laughter. My screams were swallowed by it, erased before they could even leave my throat. The floor trembled. Music rose from nowhere, an old ballroom tune, and suddenly the ship came alive with grotesque festivity. Passengers twirled, dancing stiffly, their waxy faces locked in eternal smiles. Hands reached for me, pulling me into their celebration, forcing me into the rhythm of the endless night. And in that moment, clarity struck like a knife. The ship doesn't sink. It doesn't stop. It only consumes. So if you ever find yourself tempted by a cruise, you can't trace back. Don't go, because once you board, you might never leave. Whether I was trapped in its loop or unraveling in my own mind, I'll never know.